I come to this. So before we start, just to get some perspective about from the gallery out there. Okay, um, a lot of what we're gonna talk about in this session. It does go well with Bill's session because Bill did talk about some of the stuff that we're gonna be talking about. Uh, is kind of goes along with what Bill was talking about in his session, and with really the issues of our students doing projects that address inequities. So thank you just for sharing that. And just be honest and forthcoming. That's kind of always been my MO, being honest and forthcoming with things. I think that a lot of these subjects, none of us are experts on them. Well, we might be even if you are an expert, you still have a lot to learn about things, and it's always a struggle, right, when it comes to these addressing these talking about these subjects and the challenge really for all of us as educators isn't just talking and understanding them for ourselves. It's how do we communicate these ideas to students, and how do we bring uh, those uh, those desires for social justice that a lot of our students felt, especially right after the pandemic and everything. How do we bring those out from our students in a productive way and in the way that fits the context of our STEM teaching? So, thank you, Lisa, for the vote of confidence there. So, for the sake of time, let me go ahead and just share my screen and get started. And yes, throughout the session, because there's going to be a lot of ground covered and a lot of talking by me, unfortunately. So if you have thoughts to share throughout the session, and when you see things that come up, definitely use the chat, and let's just continue that discussion throughout the session. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and then we'll go from there. And Kelly, you got the recording going, right? I think, right? Someone got the recording going. Yes, yes. Okay, perfect. Um, if you do have some questions in the chat, Kelly's our moderator today, so we're going to try to address the questions towards the end, so I can just get through all this content that for some reason we decided to put together. Um, so, the fall convening, welcome, and thank you for being here this morning. Um, and really, the big goal of what we're trying to do here with this session is to kind of help talk about these things, but help your students solve for meaningful equity. It's really about how we're going to communicate to your students, how we get your students to really understand what this is about. And that's what I do. I do a lot of things for California Mesa. One of the things I work for both our statewide program and at UC Riverside at the College of Engineering there. UC Riverside is one of our 10 University of California campuses here in California. It's located around 60, 70 miles from Los Angeles, east of Los Angeles. Our metropolitan area is huge. So Riverside is this area here where we're at is a rapidly growing area in our state. Uh, One of the special initiatives that I work with California Mesa is working with our college students in something we call the Idea Accelerator. And it's a program that we teach. We select students from across the state, college students, and we teach them about human-centered design. And invariably, when we're talking about human-centered design, issues of equity, issues of equality at the forefront, so that they can design products or design projects at the college level that meet the needs of people. That usually would mean needs that center around inequities. So our discussion today. So we had a great session about the UN goals, and Bill did a great job of unpacking the goals and presenting them and showing you ways to show them with your students. So it's a segue. We're going to do a quick segue because this is very connected to that. He also talked about a little bit about inequity and inequality. Uh, and we're gonna talk about that. What really is the big question for us when it comes to Mesa and EDC? A little bit of discussion about equity, and we're gonna unpack the terms and go back a little bit for those of you that have taught that have learned a little bit about schooling, history of schooling, and other things that we'll see. And unpacking equality in the terms of looking at it in the lens of where did that, in history, in our history, where has it come out and how it manifests in schooling a little bit. Uh, Very deep subject, very dense. But that really informs kind of how we address that big question with our students, of helping them solve problems that address inequities. And then we're actually going to talk about a few strategies, right, that you can use with your students. There were some great ideas presented in the first session, and we'll just have further strategies that kind of build on some of those things and tangible things, right? Working with educators, I know you all need tangible things you could do right away, or at least get you thinking in a certain direction so that you can do stuff with your students. So that's what we're doing today. So the UN goals, you know, that were talked about earlier today. Uh, I mean, gosh, yeah, they do exist for a reason because they represent real problems, right? These are real issues and real problems that people are facing worldwide. They're presented in a very, I think, in a great way. They're very well described, stated, and defined. Bill showed you a website where you can actually go and see them, and they have great descriptions. They even have videos, pictures, all these things talking about these goals. And they are an opportunity, right? Because they give our students a great springboard into what social justice and solving inequities would look like in our spaces, right? In other words, we're solving a problem to meet a very specific inequity, a very specific issue presented by the UN goals. So the Developing an NAC project, uh, based on these UN goals, would lead to salient projects, right? You would think that in our many years of doing NEC, our students always produce projects that, when things are seemingly so clear as far as inequities to address. But just as Bill mentioned, projects that he remembers that address inequities, we've had so many projects over the years, and projects that I experienced working with our college students here for the last 5 years that do not. For example, we've had lots of dog feeders over the years, and it's okay, he's laughing. Uh, yes, lots of dog feeders taking care of pets. Now I have a pet. Her name is Coconut, and she's a very spoiled animal, and she gets talked to and talked for all the time. But and of course we had a project one year that was a paper sorter. Yes, it was actually a very elaborate Arduino-based device that would sort paper. Yes, that's competing against projects that had to do with disabilities and all these things was this paper sorter. It was created to meet the need of a teacher that would always complain about how they couldn't keep all their papers in uh, in line. Pre-pandemic, of course, before everything went digital, and now it would be kind of obsolete to have a paper sorter, I suppose. But and then in my latest iteration of Idea Accelerator, I had a student that their project was, oh, we have a lot of free time. How do I have a lot of free time after we had a session and we were bored? So we built an itinerary builder to help us because we were bored. Okay, now I'm not poo-pooing on any of these projects, right? You know, I have a dog. Having a way to feed my dog when I'm not here, that's cool, right? And certainly, as teachers, you all know the problem of having too many papers to grade and stuff, right? And certainly, I do not want to be bored in San Francisco, right? Because there's sketchy parts of it. Um, they're good projects, but they're not really solving for equity, right? They're really, it's not, that's they're not doing that. And so many projects over the years don't do that. It's interesting, right? Students are engraved, and even, and I see this a lot at the college level. It's inculcated in them to solve for a need, right? They're engineers. They see a need, they're gonna solve for it. But for NEDC, we want them to step up the ante, right? We want them to solve problems that make a difference. It's something else. It's not just like I see a need and I address it. Uh, we want them to make a difference in the sense that they're correcting an injustice. They're demonstrating inequity. They're tipping the scales. They're doing something that has impact and meaning, right? A lot of and not to say that meeting needs isn't a bad thing, right? A student can see a need or accomplish something, and we do that all the time with Mesa Day, right? Mesa Day, they have a project they have to do something, and it's a great accomplishment for them to do it. But for NEDC, we want to push them to think a little differently, right? Um, because equity-minded projects, I mean, gosh, when you see these equity-minded projects that students produce, I mean, goodness, they have a tangible impact, right? Uh, they always do something, an impact in the sense that you remember it. And that's why, Bill, that's why I remember projects that were equity minded because, wow, we saw the impact. We felt the impact of the project, right? They usually promote social justice, right? They uh, they help tip those scales, right, of injustice, at one person at a time, even, right? And they meet needs, but not just like, oh, this was a need that I saw. They meet needs, and this is the whole inequity, right? That others can't and won't address, right? Because that's when you have an inequity, right? When you have a problem that is being ignored, that's being overlooked, that is being sometimes ignored on purpose, right? Uh, these equity-minded projects do those things, right? And it's amazing to see them. Uh, and when our students can produce these projects, it's amazing. Um, and when we're looking for equity-minded projects, these are things to look for. But there's still a lot of students and a lot of projects out there that just don't meet these needs. Now, a lot of us could talk about equity. We've all seen this picture over the years when we've done these Mesa trainings, right? It's a powerful representation of kind of what these terms kind of are. You know, when you're thinking about in practical terms, right, of equality, right, you're giving everyone the same thing. So if they're here trying to watch the Dodger game, actually, if there was a Dodger game, those crates would cost like $1,000. But everyone gets the same thing, um, which is not doesn't help everyone as they need it. And when you're talking about equity, you're giving people what they need, right? Uh, Based on who they are and their actual needs, right? And that's very noble, right? But the reality of the situation, right, that you're trying to deal with, uh, it's worse than you think, right? Because the people that have a lot seem to have a lot of that a lot. And the people that don't have a lot are, gosh, I mean, the poor kids like underground almost. And of course, the whole idea, right, of social justice movements and of a lot of our equity efforts are to forget the wall, just get rid of that wall, right? It's easier to just get rid of that wall, to get rid of that institution. And that's obviously a very difficult thing, and institutions are hard to change, but that's what you really want to see. But we can break this down, right? And a lot of you can break it down. It was broken down the last session, and you could talk about it, right? We've all seen this. We can explain it. And we've seen pictures like this, right? The analogy of a bicycle, right? Equality says that everyone gets the same bicycle. Wonderful idea, right? Like, oh, everyone gets the same thing. Therefore, things are copacetic. But that's not the case, right? Because it doesn't account for the different needs of people, the characteristics of people, right? This poor feather here, I mean, this cat here, I mean, gosh, you know, he can barely pedal, right? And the idea of equity being is that give people specifically what they need so that they can thrive, whereas everyone has a different type, size of bicycle. And we can explain this to our kids. A lot of you can, right? Especially after the last session, thinking a lot about it. We can explain these things to us. We can show them these things. There's also great videos out there on YouTube. The great equalizer, YouTube, right? We can go on there and oh my gosh, people can. There's great examples of equity, right? So why, after and that's just this is just my soapbox, right? Like after all these years, why do still students do projects that don't address inequity? Well, what's going on here that students still come at us with projects that that don't address any inequities, uh, or inequities as seen in our NDC projects. A lot to unpack, right? And that even in this question, right? There's a lot of variables with our students, right? There's a lot of reasons why students are addressing what they're addressing. One thing that came out of the last session was that some students always come in with the problem already in mind, and they already know what they want to do. And some of our kids are stubborn, right? You can't take them away from that problem or what they want to do, or they already solved it, so they just want to kind of refine it for this project. There's things like that. Lots of reasons why we have this issue that happens with NEC projects or any projects that have to do with equity. But I do want to unpack a little bit, and just kind of give some maybe reasons why phenomena like that happen after all these years of doing human-centered design before the pandemic and now addressing for equity and then UN goals. Like, why do students just don't get it? Why don't get it sometimes, right? So it really goes to what the title of the presentation, right? Equality versus equity. And just from my perspective, right, this is not a contest, right? It's not about like what, like, oh, we're gonna this is good versus evil, bad versus good. No, it's not about that. It's just about understanding and interpreting what these words are and were and how they are applied in society to understand uh, where we're going and to kind of give reasons why and how to address them. So, equality and equity. So, if you think about equality, I could think of a seminal time in history where equality came up, and it really was at the inception of our country, right? The Declaration of Independence in 1776 is really probably the most pronounced incidence of equality. Um, and it's right in the wording of the Declaration of Independence, right? Uh, I mean, I could read it because these words are right. They've been said many times uh, in our history. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So, and this is at the beginning of this document, right? That kind of was a letter written to the King of England that stated all these reasons why the the United States was going, why we're going through revolution, right? And I just noticed that that's actually the Constitution, but whatever. Um, um, but anyway, it's an old document. It's at the archives in Washington. But it's an important thing, right, to kind of think about, right? That this idea of equality has permeated our society for many years because it was at the very inception of our country that this idea was brought out. And of course, the context, like I said, was, the king can't tell us what to do. We got some liberties. You're not better than us because you're a king. You're just a person, and you want, we want to be able to govern by the consent of the people. That's another term that's used in the Declaration of Independence, the consent of the people, right? You're the king. You're not this deity that can tell us what to do. Because after all, we are all equal. And to them, equality was a truth and was self-evident. It's obvious that we're all the same. We're all equal in our rights as people, be able to govern ourselves. And as they stated, equality was a God-given and was a right for everyone. Now that's a very noble thought, right? That everyone is the same and should be treated the same and has these same rights. It's a noble thought. It is, and definitely a viable impetus for revolution. Um, and the way it's written, the consent of the people, very noble, right? So what happened, right? What you know, this great noble thought that a lot you hear people quote all the time, right? And talk about uh our country was founded on these tenets of equality, right? So what happened, right? Before we unpack that, I really gotta mention a place where we kind of should be seeing equality manifested, and that's in public schooling. Yes, public schooling, something that all of you are involved in some way or another. Um, Goodness. So, an interesting thing about public schooling was that public schooling wasn't always a public right. There was a time, I would say even half of our history of this country where kids did not go to school or or had to go to school, right? Or there were schools for them to go with. In fact, towards the beginning of this country's history, when this declaration was written and the Constitution and stuff like that, most kids didn't go to school. They didn't really go to school. There wasn't schools for them to go to. Uh, Schooling was something that was usually reserved for those of for the wealthy, right? Kids, so what did kids do back then? Well, if I was a farmer, my kid would become a farmer. If I was a blacksmith, my kid would become a blacksmith. That's how the world was in those times. And public schools, as we know them, this system that we know of public schools, where there's middle schools, high schools, elementary schools, et cetera, came about just last century. That's kind of where that system was developed and developed so that everyone had access to it. And it was really through the Industrial Revolution that heightened that moves to universal education. So the idea that everyone's going to get an education. So I mentioned this so you kind of can see that one, this system we're in is not something that is new. I mean, it is relatively new. And this whole system uh, really was developed to I don't know. Yeah, we're not going to talk too much more about the history of schooling, but yeah, it's not something that's been around for too long, actually. In fact, this schoolhouse that you guys see pictured here is a schoolhouse up in Oak Glen, which is not too far from me here. It is an old schoolhouse. It looks ancient, but it dates back to 1927, so it's a long time ago. But in the history of our country, not really too long that we have public schooling going on. Now, as we know it, schools have the mandate to educate all children, right? Very, very much so, right? Our kids get an education. That's a mandate, right? Because our schools are mostly funded by our by federal, state, and local government. Our taxes, you could say, fund our schools, right? And in some states, it's a different setup, but for the most part, it's a public thing, government funded thing. And the fact that we have common standards, common assessments, common curriculum means that everyone gets the same education. So everything's great, right? 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 Um, I suppose that the equal part of it is that every kid can receive an education in this country. But, well, we all know kind of how that's gone, right? And I just picked and chose some data here and there and some information here and there. Um, the results are always interesting, right? Like, for example, we have here in California, we have and I'm sure in other states, standards test, right? I suppose, lack of a better word, right? CASP, whatever they call it now. Um, and we always see we see these distributions all the time, right? The fact that if you're of a certain ethnicity, I guess you could say, or a certain race, I suppose, group, racial group, I guess the best way to put it, that your achievement in tests it's gonna look a certain way, and that If you're of another racial group, it's gonna compared to other racial groups, gonna be a certain way, right? Um, these students here seem to outperform these students here. But how could that happen? They're going to the same school, same schools. They're taking the same tests. They're have the same standards. They have the same curriculums. I mean, how does that? Why is this happening, right? And you see that also in other thing. I mean, standardized tests are one thing, but what about in going to college, right? Being prepared to go to college. As you can see, in this grade here in California, our graduation rates are high. Yeah, they're not bad. Some disparities, right? But they're consistently high. But they start looking at other things, right? Like HUG completion. In California, HUG means that you're completing the right coursework to gain admission into our two biggest public university systems here, UC and Cal State. Those public university systems serves tens of thousands of students throughout the state. It means that if you complete HUG requirements, you're pretty much when you apply for all these universities and colleges, you're at a great place. It's usually an indicator of college going and college preparedness. And as you can see, the disparities, right, with the green ones, there are very it's not in a equal society of an equal education system, they will not be the same. And then we have AP, advanced placement, right? Advanced placement points towards students that are taking higher level classes a lot of times for the specific sake of getting that leg up when they're going to college. And our data here in California states that our AP completion rates for certain racial groups seem to be drastically higher in some racial groups than in other racial groups. Of course, you could connect that to something called tracking, I guess. Um, tracking, of course, is the practice of in schools. A student is scores something on a certain test, has a affinity for something, and then that they get in this track, right? Of this is the class they're going to take from now on, right? Supposedly we don't track students anymore. I don't really believe it, but um, in this very seminal work about tracking, um, I mean, look at the quote that I wanted to bring out from this book is that they found in the I don't know, I think it was 15 schools right across the country that were surveyed for this seminal work that poor and minority students are most likely to be placed at the lowest levels of a school sorting system, right? That's something that was consistent. That the lowest levels of the school were the classes that teachers, you know what I mean. I don't have to elaborate, right? That most of the students, if you were a poor or minority student, that you had a much higher likelihood of being in those classes, right? All of this pointing at the fact that's what happened, right? We have a school system supposed to be equal, right? Every kid gets the right opportunity. So what's going on? Why is this happening, right? Well, let's kind of take this back. This idea of equality, right? If you think about math, right? When we see an equal sign in mathematics, we're thinking of solving something. We want an answer, right? And in mathematics, equality points towards relationship, balance, and value, right? You say an equation, you see it in a problem, and you try and find a solution, right? It has to equal something, right? That's kind of what an equal sign kind of points towards. This operation has to equal something. This algebra problem, the x has to be something. Um, so the idea of equality is the big idea is that equality needs a point of reference, right? If you're gonna say everyone's equal, equal to who? Equal to what? Who's someone's determining what equality actually is. If you're thinking about our founding fathers, and you're looking about and explore their demographics and where they come from, right? They were all white and they're mostly wealthy and mostly privileged. They were not. They were not. They were the I suppose the economic cream of the crop of the colonies, right? The people that were running the colonies, had businesses, they were in law, they uh, own property, they own land. You know, they weren't the working class. So equality to them, and creating these documents that they had their point of reference, right? And it would explain why, even in writing all men are created equal, why a lot of them were slave owners and stuff like that, right? And even though some of them struggled with that practice, they had several slave owners in that group. It's kind of weird, huh? You could write all men are created equal, and then you have a you know that going on. But again, the point of reference. And we're thinking about tracking, and I love this picture here about how tracking kind of works, right? You have these students that they take a test or they do they perform a certain level in this class, and you're literally like those your counselors in our schools literally are putting them on this kind of trajectory, right? And we see this especially in math and in STEM. It's such a huge issue that a lot of our students of color sometimes get tracked in these tracks where they're not going to take advanced math. And it starts early, right? At the middle school level is kind of where those decisions are made, right, for a lot of our students, sometimes unbeknownst to them, right? And to succeed in STEM, students have to have a certain level of proficiency in math. And if they don't, they're not going to be successful in STEM. And it goes the same with science classes, right? But who makes these decisions? In the Jin Yo's book, it shows that a lot of times they're made by decisions. The adults that are making the decisions don't have the same backgrounds and positions as beliefs as the students. I mean, they're just not examples of like, oh, this student's kind of thuggish, so I don't think they can handle AP calculus. I know that sounds awful, huh? It sounds terrible, right? To say things like that, but that's what happens. That's what happens. Very much happens. Sometimes. So yeah, to track a student by academic performance is one thing, but to track them by, oh, I think this guy could do, yeah. Because equality is a point of reference. The problem with equality is that you need to equal it to something, right? Um, but here's the thing, though. We don't get off the hook, right? Because a lot of times, how when we think about equality, it is about us. We're the point of reference, right? And when we're the point of reference about what we think equal is, equity is going to follow in the sense that we're going to design things for our needs and dispositions. And that happens a lot in the development of products. And that's been seen over the years about, that if I'm a white male, I'm on this, goodness gracious, like in phones, right? Or we've seen that in facial recognition software, right? Uh, when that was first coming out, facial recognition software wasn't recognizing certain tones of skin, you know, things like that, because we're the point of reference. And when we're the point of reference, and then equity is going to be for us. It's going to be based on our needs on this position and who we know and who we're around. And our students do the same thing. Because you see, our students, just like we, um, will look to ourselves as what's equal, and we'll design things for ourselves. Our students do the same thing. Our students live in their worlds. They live in they just like us. We grew up with predispositions. We grew up in certain cultures. We grew up with certain uh, beliefs, and I kind of equate it to In and Out, right? Or to these restaurants, right? I mean, a lot of us we grow up into these restaurants, right? We know what we know. We have the training that we do. Um, if you're an In and Out burger, you're really good at making hamburgers and shakes and fries. And sometimes no fault of your own. That's how you grew up. That's how you were developed. That's how you were built. That's what you were trained for, to make burgers, fries, and milkshakes and do a good job at it. But you're, you know, if you're an In-N-Out burger, you're not going to be able to make tacos. You're just not in your It's not in what you've learned, right? It's not in how you grew, not what you've been trained for to do. You certainly can't make gyros, right? And you certainly can't roll sushi rolls, you know? So the idea, this analogy, right, is that we are who we are. Um, and we're gonna always go towards who we are and what we are. Your kids are the same way. Uh, a lot, uh, a lot of your kids, in their worlds, it's gonna take a lot of work for them to look beyond their world and beyond their realities to do something that is addressing an inequity. But here's the thing, though: you can learn. You don't we don't get an out, you know. I'm in and out, you know. I don't have to learn to do anything else because I'm good at in and out. No, 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 you don't get an out, you know. We can learn to go beyond what we know, what we believe, and what we've been accustomed to seeing. And this makes me hungry around this time, you know. I mean, good Lord. I mean, all this food looks great to me right now. Because we're in our own little world, y'all. I mean, it's like, good Lord, you know. We all live on believe it or not, even with social media and even with this devices that we carry everywhere. In fact, I would even make the argument that this has even insulated us even more to our own little worlds, right? The pandemic certainly helped, right? Insulate us into our own little worlds. Uh, and some of us, you know, we have this routine. We do the same thing. We see the same people. We talk to the same, you know. And I found this little quote, you know. And yeah, I think some people, some kids, some of our kids love their little world. They don't want anything. They love to live, and the pandemic exacerbated that, right? For us to be in our own little worlds. It takes work and effort to look beyond the realities and the worlds that we live in. And uh, our kids may talk about they want to change the world and stuff, uh, but we can't assume that we got to help them, right, to look beyond. So, what strategies can we use to look beyond our own worlds? Because our own worlds are comfortable, right? You know, our own worlds are where we're happy at, right? And for a lot of our kids, that's what they know. So how can they look beyond that? What can we do, right? Um, so there's three main areas, right, that I think that kids can that you can help your kids to look beyond. First thing is to recognize, right? To really think, and this is something that, you know, with the UN goals, and even Bill was talking about, like the ways to kind of have to just think about and consider the problems and needs of their community. Really consciously think about and consider what's out there in their community, right? The UN goals help us do that, right? The UN goals give you a framework, a jump start to do that. Another way is that is experience, because nothing can actually take the place of actually living out a scenario uh, than actually doing it, right? Uh, so you won't know what an inequality is sometimes, an inequity is, until you actually experience what that is. And we'll talk a little bit more, but actually experience it. Some of your kids need to experience things that are beyond them, because there's no substitute for actually experiencing uh, situations, right? And we'll give you some examples, and we have another resource for you to kind of expand more on this, and then bias. We also mentioned this idea of bias, right? To check our own biases and dispositions in these projects, right? For your students to realize, for us to realize that we have biases, right? You might be in and out. A burger is the only thing you can eat, right? Not so, right? You can't live on burgers. Please don't live on burgers. They're yummy, but don't live on them. We have biases, though. We do. We have these presuppositions, and to for your students to realize and explore that is a powerful thing that will help them to look beyond. So we did create a separate presentation where we actually have some activities for you to do these things, and that's going to be shared in the resources we're sharing. Um, so I'm excited about those things, because we actually show you what those things are. Um, okay, I have like 20 minutes. Maybe I have time to kind of show. Let me stop sharing for a second. So before I go on, any so and any thoughts about so far what we kind of discussed right now, just out of the blue. All right. It's yes. So we'll share that resource with all of you, and then it will be shared with all of you. And one thing I will mention before we kind of stop is that we do have these and let me show you this because this is going to be very helpful for you, I believe. We do have these flow charts that we've been working on to help your students make these equity-based decisions. And we're going to be sharing these flow charts as well with all of you in the resources. So these flow charts kind of are a way of taking your students through the thinking of if you want to do this, address this inequity, how could you reasonably go about deciding if you want to address it or not? So this is again another tool for you to use to help your students guide them through this. So these resources we share with you. And one more final thought in the last minute I have. And then I found this when I was looking at some of the readings that I've done on this, and just a reminder of how challenging this actually is, right? Um, our tendencies are to lean back to what we know. Our tendencies are to lean back to our own worlds. Our tendencies are to lean back into our biases. And it does take work for us to step out of what we know and our own realities to do something that's different. And we have to think of our kids as the same way. It might be challenging for them to step out of their own comfort zones, to step out of their worlds that they're comfortable in, and do something that impacts their communities. So Kelly, I think that's it. I have a minute for you to kind of talk about surveys and stuff, I guess.
That's true, but you do have a question. So for our students who are maybe, sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade in that middle school area, um, these are very broad concepts of inequity. How do you bring it down to something more tangible for the middle schoolers? And I think that's a good segue into a sneak preview of the lessons and the resources.
Yes, I did conjure up some resources for you guys to be activities for you to actually do this with your students to bring those issues out, right? To have those conversations. So, um, are we closing the rooms in a minute? Do I have time to show them, or
I mean, I think you can do whatever you want. I'll put the
that
survey in, but
because I think they want me to do I think Liz wanted me to help with the other thing there. Hold on, I can show you real quick. All right, so let me um. And you're seeing the back end, huh, of this. Uh, so so I have like three different things that you could do with your students about. I have this activity called the problems activity that I've done with students before, and it's basically them literally in a nutshell is that, and I'll show you kind of what it looks like. They literally write down like um, they write down they think of all the issues they could think of that are pertinent to them. And the idea is that they, through this activity, they sort them out, and then they kind of start have discussions about um, what issues they think are something that they would want to pursue more. The great thing about this particular activity is that it gets students thinking and really expanding their thoughts about all the things that they see that are wrong in their world, in their community, and in their homes, in their immediate community. So I've done this for many years with the students, and it's really cool what comes out of this discussion and this activity that requires a lot of post-its, but it's pretty cool what comes out of it. And I have a couple other activities here. um, and the ideas to kind of unpack these ideas a little further. And again, if you look at in the curriculum, we also have other resources for you as well to use.
Well, thank you so much. Those are great. I'm biased. They're great